Welcome to the Matt Waller Podcast, where we look at success at the intersection of technology, logistics, supply chain, retail, and CPG, also known as the retail value chain. I want to clarify that this podcast is distinct from my responsibilities as a professor in the Sam M. Walton College of Business. Nonetheless, it aligns with my aspiration to provide practical insights to professionals and business by showcasing companies and people that can enhance your ability to manage, lead, and strategize and market effectively in the retail value chain. Before we dive into today's exciting episode, I'd like to thank our sponsor, New Road Capital Partners. New Road invests in proven technologies, services, and products that serve unmet needs in the marketplace. They look for companies in supply chain and logistics, as well as consumer-oriented companies. For more information, go to newroadcp.com. I would also like to disclose that I am a strategic advisor to New Road. I'd also like to recognize podcastvideos.com for the services they provide for these podcasts. I'm very pleased with their services. And now, without further ado, let's get into the exciting episode. I have with me today Gary Adams, who has over 30 years of experience at Walmart and supply chain. Many different areas of supply chain management at Walmart. And I think you're going to learn a lot from this discussion about the past, about operating supply chains, about international supply chain, about technology, about trends that are affecting supply chain logistics that you should be aware of. We'll even talk about some specific high-tech companies that are lending their skills and knowledge to improving things like bills of lading, contracting for ocean carriage, managing high-volume distribution centers for direct consumer, and many other topics. But Gary, in his 30 years at Walmart, he played many different roles, one of which was he was vice president of international logistics for Walmart. And when he was vice president of Walmart Internet Supply Chain for Walmart International, he had experience managing replenishment, e-commerce, fulfillment, transportation, and many other functions. And one thing you'll hear a little bit about is he really put a lot of emphasis on developing leaders. And I know this firsthand because I actually know, and we had never talked about this particular topic before this interview, but I know people, including former students of mine, that he has mentored, and they always bring him up as one of their best mentors. So I made it a point to ask him about that. But you're also going to hear about how the challenges he faced as he went. I mean, Walmart was in 2 international markets, and during his time, they went to 17 international markets. This is very challenging. Very few people have done that in their career, so you're going to hear from that. But you know, when we talk about the future, we talk about new technologies, new capabilities and trends and so forth. You know, this is coming from someone who experienced problems for which no technology solutions existed at the time. And there's still lots of opportunities, but they're starting to be developed as well. So, and he has served on committees with the Department of Transportation, RELA. He has his Bachelor's of Science in Business Administration and Accounting and Finance from the Sam M. Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. And I suspect his knowledge of finance and accounting probably really helped him in managing these huge logistics and supply chain problems and challenges in international operations. But I think you're really going to enjoy this and learn a lot from it. So thank you. Gary, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's great to be here.
Gary, you have, as I discussed earlier, really tremendous experience in supply chain management, way more than most people. You're in the top 1% probably 1/1000th of a percentile in terms of your experience over the past 30 years. And so one thing I'd like to ask you about to start with, from your perspective over these past 30 years, how has supply chain strategy evolved, and how has technology played a role in that?
Well, really good question. It's been very interesting, my time at Walmart and in the supply chain area. As you mentioned, I started out with a finance and accounting degree, found Walmart, and had the opportunity to transition into the supply chain area, which is obviously a core competency for Walmart. So I was very fortunate to get that opportunity. Been a lot of change really over the years in terms of just overall kind of tools and capabilities available in the market as technology has evolved. Basically applied the same principle towards managing supply chain, but figured out ways to kind of get by for many, many years as the technology kind of caught up with and created new capabilities for us to do planning, have better visibility. So over time, the core aspects of supply chain have been fairly consistent. You're still resupplying stores, still one case, one pallet at a time, one truckload at a time. But your ability to kind of forecast, have visibility to inventory flow is really kind of the differentiation. And it has evolved over time.
Well, you mentioned at the beginning, supply chain and logistics are really a core competency of Walmart, and everyone knows it. I remember when I was in graduate school at Penn State, getting my doctorate in supply chain, and back then there were very few programs like that in the country, but, I heard about Walmart early on, and I remember I read an article about Walmart really putting a lot of emphasis in terms of how they laid out their logistical network. The idea of making sure stores were close to distribution centers, whereas your competitors were just going after markets.
Right.
And I remember thinking, well, that's smart, because you can develop economies of scale and economies of scope. And eventually, I know when I moved here in 1994, Walmart and Kmart were about the same revenue. It was around $28 billion, I think. And they both started the same year.
Right.
But at that point, the economies of scale and scope for Walmart really kicked in.
Right.
At that time. But there were a lot of other things. I mean, for those listening, if you haven't read Made in America by Sam Walton, you might want to, especially if you've got a supply chain background. It's easy to pick up on some of the supply chain implications of what he talks about in there. But that must have been, you were there for 30 years, so you were there while they were really growing internationally, and supercenters were growing.
That's right, yeah. And it's interesting because the Walmart supply chain has some very kind of unique aspects to how the supply chain itself evolved. So if you think about Walmart developing into a really dominant general merchandise retailer, and to your point, evolved into a supercenter format, the hypermarket strategy that we opened 3 hypermarkets at one time as an experiment that Sam Walton kind of took on, but that helped him kind of transition into the supercenter format, and took those learnings and applied that to find out really what the consumer really wanted. As we did that had significant impact on the supply chain. So the original regional strategy was to place large distribution centers in fairly rural locations. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, just cost of infrastructure, building the facilities, having a large enough footprint. But then you also were tapping into a really good labor supply, typically in many of these locations. So that really played well into the strategy kind of that Walmart evolved to. So if you look at kind of the network and the way that the network evolved, it was very much much like the store, kind of a store of the community. We had these distribution centers placed in locations that were typically close to universities, rural areas, places where we really felt like we could run really quality operations and have really good supply of labor as well. So again, as we kind of built that regional network here in the U.S., then came in and added the grocery business that changed the dynamics a little bit because now with grocery, you want to be a little bit closer to population bases. So now you're layering in a grocery network, trying to complement your general merchandise network with some different type of dynamics to it. But yeah, it was really exciting to be a part of that aspect of Walmart kind of transitioning into the grocery business and all the unique aspects of running that type of operation as well.
So Gary, during your tenure at Walmart International, you managed a huge operation going from 2 international markets to 17. I can't imagine how challenging that must have been, but could you speak a little bit to some of the challenges you faced and how you overcame them?
Yeah, I will, Matt. That's a good question, and in many ways, it was as challenging as you made it. At the end of the day, my focus was on kind of getting really good, competent leaders in place in each one of the roles, and making absolutely sure they had all of the resources and support they needed to support their local retail operations. So at the end of the day, it almost becomes that simple, but providing those resources, providing the insight that we had kind of learned not only in the U.S. but in our other international markets, and giving them access to that experience really was my role and what allowed us and international to grow and expand so quickly. So I spent a tremendous amount of time making sure that our leaders, one, we had the right leaders, but they also kind of had the support and was considered there in their local international market, was considered there, and they had a seat at the table with the key leaders in the organization in each one of those international markets, and had an equal seat at the table. Because the supply chain sitting in the middle of kind of the buying organization and the retail store organization is just a critical part of the organization and has to be a core competency in our international markets as it is in the U.S. market. So that was our job. Make sure we had my job. Make sure I had good international leaders. They had the support and knowledge they needed to be successful. And then surround them with whatever resources they needed to make sure they could be successful.
I remember one big surprise for me was when you bought Massmart.
Yes.
And for those listening, Massmart was the largest retailer in Africa.
Right.
And they were in 16 countries in the southern part of Africa. And their number one store at the time was in Windhoek,
Yes.
the capital of Namibia. And it was more apparel, more like a department store.
Mm-hmm.
But they had all different kinds of formats. But, and I have been to Africa, and I can't imagine how challenging it must have been from a logistics and supply chain perspective, just moving product across country borders there. I might be wrong, but that's what would appear to me.
Yeah. No, you're kind of hitting on exactly some of the challenges that we address. That's the fun part of the business, though, is really kind of being able to overcome, to kind of step in, be able to kind of look a little bit after the fact, because these companies had kind of started up and established themselves, and then go in and again be able to kind of take our learnings from the U.S. apply that, but then also kind of leverage the unique nuances of the international markets. So that's a good example. If you look at the spectrum of different markets that we were servicing in international, you hit on South Africa. We also had, different dynamics as we entered Walmart Canada, for example. So one thing that was very clear to us from the beginning is Canada is a very large country. We had stores spread from Newfoundland all the way up to Vancouver, all the way north up to Yellowknife. So if you think about servicing, a broad spectrum of stores spread out, across that kind of geographic footprint, that's really different challenges than what you would face in Japan. So servicing stores in Tokyo, for example, even different than what you would have in Argentina and Brazil. Just unique aspects to each one of them. At the end of the day, you kind of got to balance that operations cost, versus your transportation cost, and really do a very good job on the front side, kind of planning your network and doing all the analytics to make sure, that you're not only placing your distribution center and assets in the right place, but you're really creating a situation where those retail stores will have a competitive advantage. As we kind of talked about Walmart, supply chain is and has to be a core competency. It's got to take the burden off the retail stores. That we always kind of went into it wanting to make sure that the stores the supply chain was invisible to them. We didn't want them worrying about, if they were going to get the product that they were supposed to be getting. Did they get the product that they ordered and or the system had ordered for them? Always emphasized with our teams in international, which we were blessed with an incredibly talented team, which is what I spent a lot of my time on, just kind of helping support the international teams and staff and make sure we had the right leadership and talent in there. But we always emphasize with them that, we think our jobs are challenging in supply chain. Try running a store for a while. Get in or live the life of the store, spend time in the stores, understand the challenges that they have on a day-to-day basis as they merchandise in the store, as they staff their store, as they kind of run and are responsible for the P&Ls of the stores. So when we start feeling, challenged, think about that end customer that we're servicing there, and how we can relieve any kind of burden we possibly can on those stores. And then the merchant's job as well is unbelievably challenging. The merchant's never right. And so we got to help them. They can't be right. It's the nature of the business. It's just too hard to forecast what demand's going to look like on a lot of the categories that they're buying, especially with the broad spectrum of items that we carry. So we've got to do everything we can in the background to kind of help them through those challenges, make their job as easy as we possibly can by being consistent, by being, good partners within the business and understanding the challenges that they have to overcome.
I think about China too, and I lived in China in 2008 and 2009, and I remember, of course, Walmart had been there for quite a few years by then.
Yeah, 1996.
96?
Yeah, that's when we am.
And I remember, most of the retailers, your competitors in China, did mostly direct store delivery from their suppliers, whereas you all were using a distribution center. At least in Shanghai, you definitely were.
Right.
Because I was living in Pudong in Shanghai. But I remember an example. So I being in supply chain, it was interesting to me. I thought, well, this is going to be a competitive advantage.
Right.
But the suppliers, one, had trouble understanding, why would I ship from point A to point B to get our product to point C?
Yeah.
They didn't understand that. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how you educated them. But one example of an interesting benefit I had never considered. So we lived close to a competitor of Walmart in China, like a block from it. And one day we went and we got sunscreen, we thought, copper tone sunscreen. And we took a short vacation. It was February. It was cold, snowing. It was like one of the coldest winters in Shanghai. But we flew down to Sanya, which is it's a city on an island called Hainan, in the South China Sea, just across from Hanoi. And we put the sun lotion on, the sunscreen on, and it didn't work. Okay. And what I found out later was, when you've got, 30 or 40 or even 100 suppliers near the loading dock doing deals, trying to get product in the store,
Right.
sometimes there's side deals going on where the real thing's substituted for fakes. And so you may not actually be getting sunscreen. It's a lotion of some sort.
Right.
But because Walmart did consolidate using distribution centers, you didn't have all that side dealing going on.
That's exactly
But I think that was a benefit a lot of consumers didn't realize, but they eventually did because I read about it in the paper. But how did you educate suppliers in that way?
Yeah, and keep in mind we were roughly, excuse me, we were roughly 10 years prior to that experience that you're describing as we entered that market. So the maturation of the supplier base to service local retailers was very, very new at that time. The manufacturers were very good at producing product, containerizing that product and shipping it abroad, but not servicing local retail operations. So we literally had to kind of take it one step at a time. So we'd have big group meetings with suppliers that are going to be resupplying our stores and basically educate just on the concept of centralization. So here's what this does, for us as a retailer. And here's what this potential advantage is for you as a supplier. But here's what we need. Here's what will help us both be successful in marketing our product in our stores. So it went back to the basics of the same things that we manage to day in and day out today. We're going to send you a purchase order. Here's what that purchase order looks like. Here's how you interpret that purchase order. And fill rates, the timing, if you pull in the orders and sending those loads to our distribution center makes all of this work. You're a true partner in this process. We can't do it without you. You won't be happy with your ability to sell through your product if you can't do your part of this as well, and we don't do our part. So it took a tremendous amount of time and effort to kind of educate those suppliers in China, as well as many other markets. Centralization in the international markets was in many cases new concepts or new to a lot of the markets, including Mexico. So we went through kind of a similar learning process with them, helping them kind of learn how to forecast and how to interpret our demand. So that all kind of played a part of it as well. But we were in such a variety of different markets, very advanced markets. As I mentioned, Japan, Canada was a very established centralized market already. So each one of the markets, again, we just kind of had to look at and kind of adapt and adjust and figure out really kind of what areas we needed to focus on to bring it up to kind of a Walmart type supply chain.
Well, it's a real interesting story. We could talk a lot more about that. I know, I was running our single cohort executive MBA program in China with Walmart during that time I lived there. And I noticed on LinkedIn that you knew Antonio Lee.
Yes, matter of fact.
Was he in charge of supply chain?
Yeah, so Antonio Lee was our head of supply chain. He actually came out of our technology area out of Walmart Korea. And we moved him over to Walmart China to run our supply chain area there after we had kind of originally started up. But he did a great job kind of leading our organization and kind of taking it to the next level there. He actually started in a distribution center in San Antonio, Texas, and
He told me about that.
Texas, and was identified, and again in the systems area. So he was our information systems representative on site at the distribution center, and kind of expressed interest to go abroad, and then Walmart. We acquired the business in Korea, and so he was a natural fit for us to take him over there. And then once we kind of got him acclimated to the international business, we saw him as a good talent, and we wanted to give him the opportunity to help us expand our Walmart China distribution operations.
One of the reasons I bring him up is because, he was in our China EMBA program.
Oh, very good.
And we met one weekend a month during that 2-year time frame. But I always loved talking to him because I learned so much about how logistics and supply chain worked in China.
Right.
Of course, we had a lot of students that were tremendous as well. But the reason I wanted to mention him, other than the fact that I'm very impressed with him as a person and supply chain person, manager, is I know from some things I've seen, he really considered you to be a mentor to him. And I know there's a lot of people who considered you to be a great mentor and leader. So would you mind speaking to that a little bit? I know you put a lot of effort into it. You and I have never talked about that before, but I know people that you've mentored and led, and clearly you stand out in that regard. So how did you develop that ability, and what did you focus on?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And Antonio is a great example of many that we had around there, but he really did a great job. And it starts with identifying people that have a passion for the business, that kind of put people first. So we want to make sure that the people that are reporting to them, are positioned well, that know they're well supported, and they have a clear vision for what the business is trying to accomplish. So when I look for leaders and I look for individuals that kind of put that as their priorities, Antonio did that. Many other of our leaders in our international markets, all of them kind of had that characteristic. So that was kind of the enabler, really, to kind of have people in there that were, very supportive of their teams. At the end of the day, the motto Walmart has is "Our people make the difference." That's clearly, the distinguishing feature that allowed these international markets to be as successful as they were. So I just felt like it was kind of my role and my responsibility, one, to make sure we had the right people in the right seats, and then give them every opportunity to be able to leverage the vast experience and knowledge within Walmart by giving them exposure to not only the Walmart U.S. logistics organization, but also partner with their other international leaders so that they could truly have a very broad perspective on solutions that were being developed around the international world that might very well apply to their international markets. Because there's a lot more in common than there is different in general in the supply chain. Again, you're still resupplying stores. We centralized our operations in every international market that we had. So you had a lot of commonality there, where you really had to have creativity and you had to have leaders like Antonio on the ground, was they had to kind of apply and interpret and use innovative ways to go about accomplishing kind of the same end. So different infrastructure challenges, different transportation solutions that had to be developed, different replenishment strategies that had to evolve and be compensate for the differences in these markets. So all of those things kind of had to factor into it. One thing that was a little bit unique about international, we had the replenishment function as part of the supply chain team. And so that was really critical for us. As you mentioned, we were kind of educating suppliers on how to resupply stores through a centralized distribution center. So having that replenishment team that was working between the merchant and the suppliers was really critical. And it allowed us, again, to not let the rest of the organization worry too much about how the product was being ordered or how that product was going to flow to the stores, because we kind of managed all of that for them. So that was, a key differentiation on the international side, that early on we had some very thoughtful leaders that supported the opportunity to have that replenishment team as part directly associated with and reporting up through the supply chain structure, which made all the difference, again, as we kind of entered those new markets or transitioned, current supply chains from a retailer that we were doing acquisitions with into kind of a Walmart supply chain.
Well, speaking of transitions, during your 30-year tenure, e-commerce popped up.
Oh, yes.
And e-commerce became important in many different ways. And how it was important differed by country, for sure. But so what are some of your learnings from that transition with e-commerce?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Love that aspect of the business. I think it's just such an exciting evolution. It's the beauty of not only supply chain, but just of retail in general. It's ever changing, ever evolving. Customer needs are challenging. So if you're a competitor and you like to compete, you like to evolve and change and innovate, retail is the place to be and supply chain is the place to be. I always tell people that, particularly when I'm recruiting. But it's a fascinating place. E-commerce clearly has created some challenges for everybody. The obvious ones are just the last mile transportation and delivery, how to manage through that and somehow make it profitable consistently, how to somehow predict demand, how to predict where to place inventory, what that demand is going to be on that inventory, and then again managing kind of that last mile. There's some incredibly good technology out there today that, quite frankly, 10, 15 years ago made the e-commerce business very challenging, tracking, visibility to the customer. But the technology today has enabled a lot of that. You still have the physical challenges or the geographic challenges of managing kind of that last mile. So, density is something we always had challenges to overcome in international as we're growing these businesses. It's much easier to manage a supply chain that's growing very quickly than it is one that's contracting or that has a lot of variability to it. E-commerce kind of has some of those challenges, and so everybody kind of continues to evolve and find solutions to kind of help through that. But technology clearly is an enabler in that space. That's making all the difference. But at the end of the day, it's really hard to support profitably remote deliveries, which is where, quite frankly, a lot of the demand is in the e-commerce space. And again, do that, cost effectively. But technology evolutions are helping solve for a lot of those challenges. And then one other kind of challenge is the obvious one which is returns. So the buying patterns of the customer, the propensity to do returns because either the product wasn't quite what it looked like, didn't quite fit like they look like, and some of the buying habits of the consumer makes the return space really challenging, but really interesting and really interesting place to try and solve in the e-commerce space.
And it is amazing how there's just still so many opportunities for entrepreneurs, and really everything we've talked about so far. There are opportunities for applying technology that haven't been done effectively.
Yes.
Still, they may have been done in a real niche or in some way, but there's still so many opportunities.
Absolutely. Yeah, supply chain planning is one that's really evolved. You think about, your network of distribution centers and trying to optimize your distribution center network, whether it's inventory placement, whether it's kind of the locations of those distribution centers and how to kind of rationalize, proximity to store clusters, and as you're kind of anticipating where your store growth is going to be. All of those things, the planning process evolved significantly, over the years. It used to be a very manual process. We had, decent systems tools that if you provided the right input and information into those tools, they would produce some pretty decent outputs and kind of tell you kind of how you needed to plan that. But you're building in assumptions, a lot of assumptions in terms of, what categories are going to grow, getting information from merchants, trying to identify what trends look like so you can build that into your monitoring. So typically you take kind of your historical, what happened last year, and then build in these assumptions, and then you get the output, and then you kind of plan around that. Tools today with AI and the analytics that's taking place, it's not only speeds up the process significantly, but also takes out a little bit of that, subjectivity as to the assumptions that you're making as you're kind of building out those models. We're significantly advanced today over, with the abilities to do that 10 or 15 years ago. And that's going to be a huge benefit to companies today as they continue to kind of go through and refine, kind of their network strategies and how they want to place and flow inventory, throughout the supply chain.
In a domestic setting, trying to optimize the use of motor carriage, ocean carriage, rail carriage, air carriage is hard.
Yes.
But in a global setting, it just seems really complicated. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. And it goes a little bit back to, scale. So we had the benefit of having significant scale, which allowed us to, fill containers, flow product, in bulk. So that's a different challenge than what a lot of retailers face, trying to manage smaller orders, consolidate those orders, and flow that product. It's a little different challenge. Both have their nuances to them. Scale has its own challenges. Just the sheer number of containers we would have to ship around the world on an annual basis, had its own share just based on, capacity planning. But on the flip side, again, the retailers that have smaller orders that are trying to do consolidation, again, and make sure that they're placing that inventory in the right place, coming into the right port in the U.S. or an international market, and placing that inventory and flowing that inventory right creates a whole different type of challenge. So both of them, same end result is what they're searching for in terms of placing inventory and having good inventory in stock. But really different challenges to manage, two different types of businesses.
Would you mind just sharing? I know you've been involved in some really innovative projects during your time at Walmart. Would you mind sharing a story about one of them that maybe had a big impact on operations in general?
And one thing, we had a little bit of a internal bias in Walmart to run our own operations. That's not always the best solution. So as we entered international markets, a lot of times it was good to have a partner there that would operate as a 3PL, run facilities for you, potentially had assets, had distribution centers that you could kind of leverage for a while. And so we always tried to really make sure we had a very good, strong network of international third-party logistics providers to kind of help support our business. And they were true partners in the business. One big win I think we had as a company that my team kind of drove was in our Sam's supply chain. Sam's Club supply chain, which I managed that area for a number of years. We had a fairly substantial network of distribution centers around the U.S., but it was fairly fragmented. We had a number, I think it was 8 different third-party service providers that we had kind of resupplying our clubs. And as I looked at that, there wasn't really a lot of leverage that we were able to achieve from that, from operating the facilities. So one of the core competencies of Walmart is kind of mirroring our operations. So if we run an operation in California, we want it to run very similar in Florida, Georgia, New York. So it's really important that those operations run very consistently, because that allows you to kind of look across them and look for opportunities, where one distribution center might be doing something different than another one. So managing the KPIs of the operations. So in that particular situation, we decided we wanted to collapse the 8 3PL providers and award 3PL providers to regions. So it had one in the Southeast, one in the central part of the U.S., and one on the west part of the U.S. So that really transformed kind of the supply chain distribution network from a consistency standpoint, from an ease of management and overseeing the 3PL operation standpoint, and from a just overall efficiency standpoint, because now you had very consistent operations across the network, and you had the ability to kind of look across both individual DCs, benchmark within the regions, and then benchmark the regions against each other, which, again, that's something that Walmart has done really well over the years, is kind of manage those, key performance indicators to help them continue to improve operations and manage successfully.
So now you're an operating partner with New Road Capital Partners, a private equity firm, and you're involved in everything from due diligence to advising portfolio companies and other things. What are some common challenges that you see today facing, let's say, early stage types of tech companies? Not just tech, because you're advising other types of companies as well.
Sure.
But what are some challenges you see in common?
Yeah, I think visibility is something that it's very difficult for some of these startup companies to just get visibility to the right people in the right organizations, so that they really can kind of understand and see the value. The technology out there today is just incredible. I mean, it's moving so fast. The quality and the fit for specific needs within organizations, even as large as Walmart, is very obvious to me as I see some of these new companies that are creating solutions for real problems that are out there in the industry. But so I think small companies kind of getting visibility within these organizations, some of these organizations being open to smaller companies providing these kind of solutions for them, and not feeling like they have to develop those capabilities in-house all the time, which again, there's tends to be a little bit of a bias from time to time for good reasons to kind of develop in-house solutions. But I find now, as I'm looking back on it, having been in Walmart and there was a lot of these solutions that I wish I would have had visibility to, take a look at them and apply them to solve for some challenges that we were having. And because the development time is much quicker, the flexibility and ease of implementing and integrating these systems into those environments is much better than what it had been in the past. And again, the information flow and visibility is significantly better with some of these new tools. Excuse me.
So, Gary, one of the portfolio companies that you advise that I find to be really interesting is a company called Lajoie. And they, there's so many companies now that are engaged in direct-to-consumer fulfillment,
right?
High volume direct-to-consumer fulfillment. And many times they're trying to use warehouse management systems that weren't designed for that problem.
Right.
And so it takes them a long time to get it set up and to run it, Would you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, really interesting company based out of Chicago. They were really determined to create a alternative to the current existing kind of more established WMS systems that, as you pointed out, were really designed to run warehouses, but weren't always kind of refined to service the e-commerce business. Lojua found a niche part of the business there that created an incredibly interesting tool to be able to quickly implement a WMS system into whether it be a pop-up e-commerce business, an existing e-commerce facility that may be mid-sized, or even e-commerce facilities that are at scale, replacing the existing WMS systems. But they really kind of focus their time and attention on simplicity. Now, it can handle the complications and complexities of large-scale operations, but they wanted to make sure that they had a system that was really easy to implement, was easy to set up by the local operations team, and was extremely flexible to be able to accommodate many different types of e-commerce type businesses that are out there. So we're really excited to get visibility to Lojua once we got in there and met the team and saw what they had developed and some of the traction that they had already gotten. It was a natural for us to want to partner with them.
Gary, one other company I'd like to talk to you about is WaveBL. I find it very interesting. And I actually interviewed Oriel Bison fairly recently.
Yeah.
He's the chief product officer for WaveBL. And just as a side note, he got his degrees from Tel Aviv University.
Yeah.
And one fact I learned about Tel Aviv University that was really interesting was that the number of founders that have graduated from Tel Aviv University and then went on to create companies that became unicorns, that is, firms with more than $1 billion in market cap. Tel Aviv University is number 2 in the world, which is remarkable. And one of the reasons it's remarkable is because Tel Aviv University is small, and Israel's very small, and Israel's surrounded by lots of enemies. And to think that they're able to do that, and I know I read a book a long time ago, it seems like it was over 10 years ago, called Startup Nation, about all these startups coming out of Israel. But WaveBL is really interesting because it's solving a problem that you would have thought would have been solved a long time ago.
Right.
With respect to bills of lading. And would you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, another really exciting company that we got to know probably 18 months ago. And they were solving for a very specific solve in the industry that, quite frankly, I didn't realize was as big a pain point as it was. If you go back through kind of COVID and some of the disruption of the way freight was flowing via ocean containers into the U.S., what we found out was, in many cases, the freight was arriving before the bill of lading was arriving and some of the commercial documents was arriving, which created some challenges clearing that freight and moving that freight into the supply chain. So this was kind of an issue that was kind of happening in the background. Well, companies like WaveBL was on the forefront, but they were developing and using blockchain technology to create a digital form of that bill of lading, which is transmitted obviously electronically. So you really took all of the time aspect and the physical handling of that commercial document out of the mix. So really excited about what they're doing, not only on the ocean bill of lading standpoint, but they're tackling other commercial invoice documents as well, and are well down a path of creating some significant efficiencies, both from a sustainability standpoint, but also from a speed and cost effectiveness standpoint, digitalizing all types of commercial documents that are out there. So we're really excited. It's an unbelievably talented team, and we're happy to be associated with them.
Well, it's neat that you're getting to work with companies that really solve problems you experienced in your career. And I'll ask you about one more if you don't mind.
Sure.
And I know the least about this one.
Okay.
NYSHEX.
Oh, yeah. New York Shipping Exchange. So New York Shipping Exchange is a company out of New York. One of the challenges in the ocean industry is forecasting. So as a retailer is forecasting what quantities and the timing of which they're going to flow merchandise from manufacturing over at origin all the way to destination. And so you have these very valuable assets that the ocean carriers have that they're trying to fill that space on. And when they have variability in what was forecasted versus what actually flows, that creates all these inefficiencies, not only for the ocean carrier, but also creates challenges for the retailer that's trying to flow this merchandise abroad. Because if the demand is higher than what the ocean carrier anticipated, there's not going to be space on those vessels. If the demand is lower or the freight doesn't flow as forecasted to a lesser degree than what was planned, then they have excess space, which creates inefficiencies. So NYSHEX created a really clever digital contract that basically commits both the shipper as well as the ocean carrier to the contract that they have agreed to. So in the past, ocean carriers and retailers or shippers, they would have an agreement on when they want to flow, but it really wasn't enforceable. So NYSHEX created an enforceable contract between the shipper and the ocean carrier, which really is healthier for both groups. And it really kind of puts, accountability and puts a lot more emphasis on both the shipper and the carrier to make sure they're performing to the agreement.
Interesting. And I could see how that might be hard for people to get their head around if you've been in transportation a long time, because, if you've just dealt with domestic truckload trucking, you come up with a contract, but it's unenforceable, generally speaking. And so now you're talking about something, international ocean carriage, container ships, where the shipper and the carrier have a binding agreement.
Right.
And I guess with trucking, domestic trucking, especially truckload, because it's irregular route, you don't know where your capacity is going to be, so it's hard to commit.
That's right.
But with ocean container shipping, there's more of a schedule.
That's exactly right. Yeah, so there's, if you think about big ocean vessels and the efficiency that really needs to be operated with those vessels, and it puts a little different demand or a little higher sense of urgency to make sure those assets are being utilized efficiently. You have to fill those vessels up. They have to leave on time. They have to arrive on time, because the lead times between manufacturing to get to a distribution center in the U.S., considering the origin transportation, the ocean transportation, and then the transportation inland through the dray process, typically is going to be 16 to 20 days just to the West Coast side. Add another 6 to 8 days if you're going to the East Coast or more. So you have a lot of opportunity in there for variability. So the manufacturing process has to be on time. The loading at the manufacturing facility has to be on time. It has to get to the origin port on time. It's got to be loaded on the vessel it was intended to be loaded on. Got to get to the destination port on time, and then the movement off the terminal and the port. So you can see all the opportunities there for variability in the flow of that product. And so that's the supply chain challenge, is taking all that variability out so that you can get all the efficiency you possibly can.
One other thing I'd like to bring up with you, because I'm curious, again, we've not talked about this topic before, but I'm curious. I'm real familiar with how Walmart has jumped in and helped with natural disasters.
Right.
The one that stands out to me, and this is dating me a little bit, is Katrina.
Right.
When Katrina happened, Walmart jumped in, and I won't go into all the ways they did it. Like with pharmacy, it was amazing what they did.
Right.
But they really jumped in, and it seemed like even the federal agencies had trouble delivering anything successfully, but Walmart just nailed it. And even recently, I know Walmart in Hawaii jumped in and was helping with the Maui disaster, the fire, providing supplies and so forth. But I don't know as much about what they've done internationally.
Okay.
So if you could speak to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, as we talked about, kind of our people make the difference in Walmart. It's ordinary people doing extraordinary things rise to the occasion in those situations. And one thing I experienced during my entire tenure at Walmart was I really never got second guessed when I was doing the right thing. So if you see a need, if you see an opportunity to go out and help, to go support a situation like that, you just jump in and you do it. So you don't have to worry about it. You feel empowered to be able to go in and really make a difference in those situations. And that allowed Walmart through Katrina, through the situation in Hawaii. So you had people that truly felt like they had the ability to jump in, act, and have the support of the organization to do the right thing. So very much core competency, core expectation within the organization, which made it a really great organization to work with over the years.
So I would like to wind this up with just a little discussion about the future.
Yeah.
Not way far in the future, because the future comes more quickly than it used to. Let's say 5 to 10 years out at max.
Yeah.
But what are some trends that you're seeing that you think are really going to affect supply chain logistics, say, in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. We kind of touched on it, but just the evolution of technology, visibility, the ability to kind of plan supply chains is so further advanced and will continue to accelerate in these next few years, much more than we've even seen in the past. I think that's pretty clear. Just the ability to use AI, and we've had recent conversations with several organizations that are going to actually have the ability to, much like ChatGPT, but do a lot of kind of your supply chain planning through vocalization versus the typical information input, that type of thing. So that's gonna accelerate significantly. It's gonna speed up planning processes. It's gonna speed up the ability to kind of analyze and assess how your supply chain is functioning, and allow you to kind of adjust on the fly on how you're going about managing not only inventory placements, but your whole replenishment process and forecast and demand. So definitely see significant acceleration in that space, which is going to make a world of difference in the supply chain area.
Well, Gary, thank you so much. This has been really informative. I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us about this.
You bet. My pleasure. It's always a pleasure getting to spend some time with you.
If you're finding value in this podcast, we greatly appreciate your support by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Additionally, following us on Apple and Spotify and leaving up to a 5-star review would be immensely helpful. We welcome any feedback or questions related to the podcast, as well as suggestions for further topics and guests. You can leave your comments on our YouTube channel, and rest assured that I will read each and every one of them. Please also take a moment to check out our podcast sponsors, as they play a critical role in keeping this podcast running. For more information on specific topics, timestamps, or links to articles mentioned during the podcast, head over to mattwallerpodcast.com.